Thank you. Welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. I hope we'll find that this venue is preferable to the one we were in last time, where I certainly found it quite hard to hear. Generally members have been positive about this, but we won't be able to have this particular room each time, so we may be playing swap about with going upstairs, being down here, as and when the rooms are available. I'd also like to say before we start that obviously the meeting is being recorded, but also we have a photographer here who's taking pictures on behalf of Tracy Braben, the Mayor of West Yorkshire, just to show the sort of issues that are carrying on. And thank you for coming here, Tracy, today. I think, as you probably don't know everybody, it would be appropriate just to go around rapidly and everyone to introduce themselves. Starting with myself, who you do know, Al Garthwaite from Leeds, Councillor from Leeds as the Chair. Go around this way.
Steve Hall, Edmund White, Kirklees Council.
Councillor Sinead Angle from Bradford.
Councillor Seth Presidency of Bradford.
Andrew Cooper, Kirklees.
Councillor McCarthy, Leeds.
Paul Sullivan, Councillor from Bradford. Councillor Robert Thornburg from Colville.
Councillor Osmond from Wakefield Council.
Fiona Bernardo, I'm the Panel Support Officer.
Temporary Assistant Chief Constable Demi Miller, and I lead on local policing and safeguarding matters. Alan Race, Director of Strategy, Communications and Policing at the West Yorkshire Combined Authority.
Alison Lowe, Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime.
Tracy Braben, Mayor of West Yorkshire.
I'm the Women's Research Officer and Panel Support Officer for the Mayor.
Julie Reid, Head of Policing and Crime.
Trevor Lake, Independent Member.
Sarah Courtney, Councillor, Culture Council.
Nicole Sharp, Leeds City Council.
Councillor Marin Tennant, King Wakefield Council.
Sharon Fraser, Wakefield Council, Legal Advisor to the panel.
Samantha Wilkinson, Panel Officer. Thank you. We do have a couple of apologies, don't we, today? Councillor Anthony Smith and Joe Sachs. Thank you. So, the first item, approving the minutes from 10th of June. And there are a few matters arising and matters of accuracy. One matter of accuracy.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, on the front sheet where it says present, it's got my name down, and I did actually send my apologies, even though it's recorded further on.
Thank you, Maureen, thank you. And I will take matters arising and matters of accuracy at the same time as we go through. So that's page 1. Page 2. Page 3. And we've noticed that the grant settlement is still to be announced. Is that correct? Yes. So we'll be looking at that for the next panel coming up in September.
We don't normally get it till about December, just the same as local authorities.
Till December.
Yeah, it'd be great if we could find out now.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Looking on to page 4, the 11.3, the neurodiversity awareness training timelines is still awaited. Yes?
I'll chase that with Chief.
You'll chase that? Yes, if we can keep that on the agenda for next time. I don't want to lose sight of it. Thank you. And moving on. And the POLED programme that's still awaited as well. Chase that. Moving on page 4, page 5, 11.10. We did have some issues there.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. 11.10. It's really just a follow-up. I think we probably missed an opportunity to ask for a further follow-up. Having identified that mental health is the single biggest issue in police call-outs, it then says that the infrastructure is there to manage it, but the capacity is not. So I feel that there's a bit of something missing, a bit more narrative required around, okay, so what's going to happen about that, and at what point will that capacity be filled?
Yeah, so I'll ask for another pay. I think we've done a mental health paper, but we'll do another mental health paper.
Just an update, really.
Yeah, an update. I mean, I think capacity has been reached, it has been filled, and the whole point is that the police are really calling time on the fact that they're doing the Mental Health Trust job often, and the capacity of the Mental Health Trust means that the capacity on policing time is unacceptable.
If it's useful to note as well that we're soon going out to recruitment for our inclusivity champion that is co-funded by West Yorkshire and Harrogate Health Partnership, and what we're trying to do is have that public health approach to crime. So really working with them, partnering on inclusivity, but also that health disparity in communities and so on. So we might actually get a bit more support in that area from that champion that we could feed into this.
Yeah, that'd be really. It doesn't need to be a big paper, just a little sort of an addendum really to explain. Knowing that, how are we going to manage it?
And the point is right that the police are being called out too often on mental health calls rather than on criminal calls.
Does that answer your question as well,
I think I'd like a bit more additional information, which I'll bring up later in the other paper.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to page 6 then. And yes, 11.142, if you could give us details of the POLED programme when that is available, please. Moving on to page 7, the Vision Zero comparison data is still outstanding. When might we expect that? Could you chase that up?
Sorry, I was just making notes on the vision data.
It's the data from Scandinavia.
From Scandinavia.
Oh, right, yeah. It was actually in a paper to Bradford Exec a couple of weeks ago, which I attended. Could have just nicked their paper as well.
Okay. If you could make that available, that would be very useful. Thank you. And finally, page 8, just to point out that in 19.1, it does say that this meeting will be the AGM. Of course, we had the AGM last time. Just a matter of accuracy. Thank you. Now, any urgent items which we might need to consider that you wish to raise now there, Deputy Mayor? We had no declarations of interest. Thank you. So we'll move on to the performance management report, which we do have a fair amount of things to check up on. Sorry? Yes, could you introduce this for us to start with, Alison?
If I may just make some opening remarks. Thank you so much and congratulations on your new role as Chair. Just firstly, I'm sure the panel would want to join me in congratulating PS Mike Watkins and PC Tom Swift, who recently, last night actually, won the Regional Police Bravery Awards. And you may have seen the body cam footage of them tackling a knife-wielding person on a bus, and they barehanded. It was just an incredible piece of bravery, wasn't it? And so I'm really proud that they are showing the best of us in West Yorkshire. And additionally, I might also just like to congratulate my Deputy Mayor for her OBE that she collected yesterday. She's not only an honorary doctor now, but also has an OBE. I don't know, she's brought it so we can all have a look at it. In the flesh, so it's really nice to see it. Maybe one day we can all have our OBE, but well done, Alison. And I know that services to mental health charities and Touchstone and the work you did during the pandemic, so congratulations, we're all very proud of you.
And do pass our congratulations on from the panel to the PCs who've won those bravery awards.
We will. I'm going to write to them, so I'll mention that as well. So thank you for your good wishes. Okay, now to performance monitoring report. Well, what was really interesting last time we met is that you were very clear that you wanted that parallel view of the performance report and also the police and crime plan. So thank you to my colleagues for this new design so that you can see really clearly that each item comes under the umbrella of the priority from the police and crime plan, so we can see really super hyper clearly. So the first part of the plan, I'm going to take it as read, that everyone's had a chance to read over the data, and it's really good to have that clear data, so thank you for that. So we've changed the name from the delivery quarterly to this monitoring report because we think it's really important that we make that case that we are monitoring progress. And this is the first report that looks at the measures from the plan, split into those 4 chapters for the 4 priorities. And at the start of each, as you'll see, there's the measures that relate to this area of work, showing the current position and the trends. And then there's a breakdown of data. And then each chapter is finished with the work taking place in the Police and Crime Office, West Yorkshire Police, that fulfil the potentials of the plan. So we tried to make it simple and clear as possible. So the first item, the supporting witnesses and victims and improving criminal justice. We see victim satisfaction is on a downward trend, and I want to reassure you that we have discussed this at length with the Chief as to how we can improve on that. But some of the downturn is due to the national difficulties in policing, and you'll all know that only a couple of days ago when we were at, the heat wave was at its hottest, the pressures on policing and our emergency services more widely are immense. So it is challenging, that ebb and flow. Also, we discussed 9-9 calls and the 10-second target. Now, you'll all know that there's a number of seconds that it needs to be transferred from BT to 999, and it's a high-pressure job. It is important that we stick to that target, and really hard for all forces across the country. And it is reassuring that our performance is at the top half of all forces. And not one abandoned 999 call, and that's really important to me, and I'm sure that's important to you. But it's interesting that 101s are building, online is building, and there will be, as I'm sure the decade rolls on, more interactions online with police. But that 999 is really important that we keep that 10-second target. So keeping people safe and building resilience. This is new indicators, monitoring young people at risk of criminal exploitation and information on cybercrime. We're going to be building on that in the course of the plan, and of course that will be subject to scrutiny going forward. The numbers of repeat victims of hate and domestic abuse show trends that within that tight scope, and the numbers going ebbing and flowing, as you will see in the table. And the measure of DVPN and DVPO, that's as a result of HMI CFRS recommendation, and helps us track progress in West Yorkshire. Something that's of interest to me, and I know is of interest to you as a panel, is stalking. I've always said that stalking is a slow death, and that is so much part of domestic violence that we don't monitor it properly. So we've been challenging the Chief and West Yorkshire Police on this, so that's been important to me. Now, the stalking protection orders are currently low, but we discussed the new stalking coordination team that's going to be focused on this, and I'm really hopeful that this will help us really disseminate how stalking is part of domestic violence, domestic abuse. And if we can control stalking, then potentially we will have fewer women murdered. There are new innovations that are that are coming forward. We've got a pilot in West Yorkshire Police, I think we've spoken about it before, where the perpetrator wears a bracelet, an anklet, and when they breach an area where the victim or the potential victim is, an alert goes off on the phone. Now, this has to be everybody has to be compliant in this. You can't force people to have it, but it seems to be working. I know that the Home Office are very interested in the outcomes of that. So innovation is at the heart of how we can deliver better outcomes in policing. So I'm really pleased that West Yorkshire Police are up for that. Safer places and thriving communities. You'll know that the VRU is my responsibility, and I'm really pleased with how the Violence Reduction Unit are making a difference in our communities and really trying to tackle our priority for getting upstream, to have that early intervention, to have that diversion that's, I think, potentially going to save young people from a life of crime. More of detail on this area is going to be included in the VRU document, which has been postponed, Chair, to the next panel meeting. We'll go into more detail at that next meeting. Moving on, neighbourhood crime and antisocial behaviour. The trends here have been reported before. Apart from, you'll notice theft of vehicle, which is a rise across the country. Due to the increase in the cost of car parts, and I'm sure Brexit and all sorts of other challenges have meant importing car parts is more difficult, probably contributing to the rising cost. I'm very pleased to be able to see that workforce numbers, my pledge to you and the people of West Yorkshire, 750 more police officers and staff. We look like, hopefully, fingers crossed and with a fair wind, that at the end of my term we're actually going to be beyond that. So we will be monitoring that. At every meeting we attend, we ask for details of that uplift and recruitment. But it is very welcome that the numbers of ethnic minorities and women in the force are also rising. And we're the only area in the North East that's green for all the uplift programme metrics. So I'm hoping that our decision very early on to focus on recruitment is having an impact across the force in West Yorkshire. So that's all good news. So they responding to multiple and complex needs. Numbers of missing people went down during the pandemic, and although rising, not returned to those previous numbers. We know that this is such a substantial part of policing, is finding missing people. It would be great to keep those numbers below 1920. And the numbers from care homes, I want the panel to know that I've raised children's homes and private sector outsourcing of children's homes and care with local authority leaders, because this has got to be a joint approach. This is not something the police can solve. So it's something that's on my radar and on their radar to look at. So if I may, Chair, move on to the drug and alcohol report. Questions, yes. Yeah. I'm assuming there were no questions. How dare I?
I thought it's best to let you give the whole overview.
Thank you, and then take it in the
bring
round.
out the points that you wish to bring out. But we have gone into this in some detail in our pre-meeting, and I think there are issues that members will want to bring up about specific aspects of the report. But thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Wendy. You're trying to stop me, weren't you?
No quick meeting indeed. If we didn't have those questions. I think I have the first question, and it relates to 1.5, the criminal justice measures. And there are, I know that it's an area that you do not have direct control over, but you work closely with criminal justice partners to influence better outcomes. And chair the local criminal justice board. And I would like to ask a bit more about the measures that are being taken to address the issues which have been exacerbated by the pandemic, and understand more about the timescales around the discussion on the criminal justice scorecards.
It might be useful to know about the pilots as well.
Oh yeah. Shall I answer this? Because I chair the local criminal justice board and meet all the partners on a regular basis. And the biggest issue that's before us is the amount of time it's taking to get cases to court, and there's a whole partnership approach to try to improve that. But of course, it's not just one agency; it's all the agencies working together: CPS, the court system, the probation system, youth offending, policing, etc., etc. So we know that there have been the additional courts, the Nightingale courts, that have been held to try to reduce the backlog. It's a national problem, and what we've been doing in West Yorkshire is, I don't know if you know that we've got the Section 28 pilot here in West Yorkshire, so I think there's only a few nationally, and we've got one of them, where victims can choose to use the link, so they don't have to appear in court. Victims and witnesses can ask for appearance via a video link, and they can be safely housed in one of our women's centres. For example, there's one here in Wakefield that facilitates that, or down at the SARC, we've got a video link there too, and that has been, and in fact we've just done a big piece of work on use of the Section 28 video links, because even though we have it, there were lots of reasons why it wasn't being used, because there was problems in the system. So I asked for an emergency meeting of all the partners to be held to really start to unpick some of the issues, because if victims and witnesses can't give evidence in the way that they feel safe, then obviously there's not going to be a trial, and the alleged perpetrator will then not face justice. So that's a big piece of work that's still ongoing. There's a little issue with the court service that we're trying to resolve, or I will be writing to the head of Her Majesty's court system in order to try to resolve this issue. So lots of partnership working, lots of working nationally as well as locally to try to speed up the process, the timings around the backlog. But also we've got national metrics that we have to report against. And there's some areas where West Yorkshire is doing better. So, for example, where we've got a much higher positive outcome rate for rape, for example. I think it's about 9.6% of our cases we get to trial. Obviously, that's not great, because there's another 90% not getting there. But nationally, when it's 1.3%, obviously we're doing much better, and that is up from last year, because we were down to about 8.4 last year, so we've got up again, so that's great. The pilot that's happening, you might have seen it on the BBC News, is that the Justice Minister of the time,
Has that changed? We don't know who it is
now, wanted to develop some pilots nationally to try to really address the poor outcomes for rape trials. And so they're going to do, basically it's a cluster court, which we had in Leeds many years ago, as you'll remember, for domestic abuse. So they're wanting to have dedicated rape courts here in Leeds. So the Mayor and I are trying to meet with whoever the new minister is to understand what that will look like. We're going to be inviting the police and all the local criminal justice board partners to understand how that can be best developed and delivered. But we know when you've got everyone working together to bring perpetrators to justice, and everyone's been trained and everybody understands what works and what doesn't work, and that's also using Section 28 video links, which, as I've said, have experienced some difficulties. We think we might be able to get some really great outcomes for rape victims here in West Yorkshire. So that's something that's really good that's come from the Department of Justice, and hopefully we'll be able to report on that in the, maybe not the next meeting, because I think it's starting in September, but we'll definitely report on that later on in this year. So what's going on? It's not one department's responsibility, it is that multi-agency approach. But every single partner in the local criminal justice board has their own data set that they have to report on, and then we discuss those in the round. And as I say, some of those we're doing better, some of those we're not doing as well as other areas.
It's a national challenge, isn't it?
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's a very full answer to the question. Thank you. Happy with that. I think going on to item 2, keeping people safe and building resilience, I believe that, yes, Sarah, Councillor Courtney, I'm going to be formal for the sake of the webcast and the public. Otherwise, I'm just using first names and
I'm happy with first names.
It's met.
Yes, thank you. I'm just wondering whether you, Alison, and are satisfied with the figures. Obviously, we've got some figures going upwards, that these figures don't represent a significantly declining picture, and how can you be assured that victims are receiving help and support and, sort of importantly, feeling that justice is being met?
I mean, just to say, this is an ongoing challenge, isn't it? And in fact, I said to the Chief Constable the other day, all this money, we have to be making a difference. And if it's just one woman is an intervention saves that woman, then it is working. But there will always be some women who we can't help, and our job will be then to support the victim. But I really hear your concern regarding numbers.
Yeah, so I think that some of this data is disappointing and obviously pointing in the wrong direction. Some of it, I mean, I should just say the reason these arrows are black is because we don't know enough about what sits behind these numbers to be able to be categoric about whether they're good or they're bad. I think the number of young persons flagged as at risk, the reason that's gone up is because here in West Yorkshire we've got brilliant multi-agency partnership arrangements, and I think we flag people a bit earlier than maybe other local authorities or other police forces might do. And as you know, West Yorkshire is outstanding for its CDI, its crime data integrity, and that's part of the push to ensure that any child that potentially is at risk gets flagged. But I'm not personally unhappy that the number of flagged children is increasing. It's what we're doing to maintain and manage that risk is the question I'd be asking of the police, which we do ask of the police. The fact that they're flagged doesn't mean to say that actually harm has been caused to those children. It just means that there's a plan around each of those children, which I think is a good thing. Obviously, the number of repeat domestic abuse offenders, it's never good if that number goes up. Clearly, part of 2019-20 was the start of the pandemic, and then the full data for 2021. We know that there wasn't, even though the domestic abuse went up, we also know that people didn't have the same access to, agencies to report those things to because of the things not being fully open. So I know that the reason that Wendy put these in black was because we didn't always have a really good understanding of the absolutes. So, Wendy, is there anything you want to add to?
Just before you do, Wendy, I'd also say that part of the problem is it may be that people feel more confident to report a hate crime because they know they're going to be listened to. Sure. And so, recording misogyny as a hate crime, you will have obviously then an increase in those numbers. But is that because of greater confidence, or is it because more? That there's more hate on the streets. Sorry, Wendy.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. It is, some of these are ambiguous. You could argue either way. So rather than us make a decision and say we think this is bad, when actually we can see it from both angles, it's better to give you a direction and then give you the assurance that we're looking at it at both sides to make sure we're not covering up something by saying, oh, well, maybe domestic abuse is going down, but that's because victims are frightened to say something to the police about it. So that's why it's that way.
And placing those interventions like Cara, where people who have been perpetrators, trying to get in to stop them doing it again and be repeat perpetrators. So I do appreciate why they're over.
Yeah, and just of course that people can have a marker for hate crime based on their gender since last December. So the last 3 months of this data will of course include that. But also we're doing lots of work to engage those members of the community who hitherto may not have felt safe. So for example, I was at Bradford Pride last week, doing lots and lots of work to try and encourage more LGBT plus people to come and report. I've done lots of, as has the Mayor of course, done lots of work across West Yorkshire, engaging those communities of interest that maybe haven't been as engaged before, and I'd like to think that some of the hate crime reporting is a result of that additional engagement that we've been undertaking.
Thank you, that's quite reassuring, thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to number 3.10 and regarding the increasing numbers of police officers, and Councillor Sullivan, you have a question.
Thank you, Chair. Congratulations on your review. And this is a chance for you to tell us some good news. What do we think the effect
will be of the 750 officers, you know, where might you be putting them? I know this might be a
operational,
but it'd be handy for us to know if you've any ideas.
Just before you answer that question, can I just say, last week was the 20th anniversary of the invention of the PCSOs, and I just want to put on record my thanks to all our PCSOs in West Yorkshire, and the numbers that we're adding is a real positive in our region, but where they're going, maybe Damien would like to answer.
Yeah, certainly can, Mayor. So in relation to the ones that we've received so far, because I think what we've got to appreciate, it does take 3 years to train them. So we're just starting to see those that we recruited in year 1 coming through year 2 and landing in the districts now. The majority of the time's actually been spent at university training to be ready to actually get onto the streets. So we've already put an increase into district policing with regards to the numbers that are on the front line. So there's about over 100 that went into there. We had the safeguarding review that put an extra 67 into the safeguarding departments across the force. And that was in relation to bringing up the numbers to deal with the demand that was coming through, not only in relation to domestic abuse, but also creating some domestic abuse IOM teams as well. So there's still a proportion that is to be allocated because they've not yet come through, because we've still got technically another year of the police uplift programme, which leaves about 350 to be allocated. And the initial indications at this moment in time is we would look to put those into the frontline services, because that's where we're really struggling to deal with the increase in demand at this moment in time. So that would initially be with regards to patrol numbers to deal with that demand that's coming through.
Thank you. I'll have a supplementary.
Supplementary, yes.
You mentioned the 3 years, and I know it's anecdotal, but again, I've been told that people are sort of taking the degree and then dipping out. Now, to make it not anecdotal, can we going forward monitor this? And it's, you know, I appreciate it's not within your gift, but can we use it to pressure the national government? To, you know, if we start finding out.
Yeah, so can I just say, Councillor Sullivan, no one's left yet because the 3-year degree course has not been completed. Yeah. That's October. So actually all eyes are on what happens from October, not just here in West Yorkshire but nationally. I meet at Trinity University, who are the PEQF providers, the Police Education Quality Framework providers. I meet them quarterly for lots of reasons, to ensure the quality of the course, to ensure that the Mayor's target around inclusion and representation is being met. So I ask about dropout by protected characteristic, for example. I also have been asking about the welfare and elder support that's been putting in. And in the last 12 months, not one person has dropped out of the university course, which is great. And they have been checking in with all of the students to see, is your intention to remain in policing at the end of this course? And so far, everyone is saying yes. I mean, they would, wouldn't they? But so far, everyone is indicating their passion for policing has increased through this nearly 3 year period. But nationally, we are all looking to see what happens in October. I suspect West Yorkshire will be better placed than some of the forces, but we all have to have that national stop and evaluation once we've people have moved into policing or not. The issue is that when this issue was raised with Kitty Patel, she refused to put it into the contract that people who got these degrees then had to serve a minimum period before they could leave. She said, no, people will stay. Well, we will see.
If it's helpful, I did raise this in the bilateral with the Chief this week, and he reassured me from talking to colleagues that actually there does feel like there's a real commitment to stay. Because morale is high. I think it's obviously better to stay in a force that's outstanding than a force in difficulty. So I'm hoping that all those officers stay.
Is that morale's high in the cohort that were doing the degree? Because I'm hearing that morale is not high generally.
Well, it's because
on the floor was the phrase I
well, they're not paid
properly.
When starting salaries for teachers are 30,000 and starting salaries for police officers is 21 plus, it's, you know, they need that uplift, and we're making representations to government, and in fact I've just written to the policing minister on that very subject, because how can you attract talented police officers when they could be teachers, and we love teachers, but they could also be a carer. They could do many other jobs on that starting salary, and it's a very tough job being an officer. And if I may, Councillor Sullivan, just around the numbers, what's really important to also remember is that 750 plus, my target, doesn't replace what we lost in austerity. So we will, you know, we're never going to, we have to keep pressing that argument that losing 21,000 officers over the last few years has decimated our numbers. So it's really tough to get back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Officer, if I could say, could you avoid using phrases like IOM?
Yes, certainly.
For the sake of the public and for us here, who aren't as soaked in the meaning of all the initials as obviously you are as recruits.
Chair, thank you so much for that. That's been a very steep learning curve for me as well.
There are a lot of them. Yes, as with any particular line of work. Could you just say what IOM is, please?
Yes, it's integrated offender management. I do apologise, it's just a habit that police officers slip into.
Of course, it's quite totally understandable. Yes, so I've got Councillor Carter. Yes, and then Councillor Cooper and then Councillor Engel.
Thank you. My question is in relation to 3.10 as well. I understand now that safeguarding unit is virtually fully staffed, and rightly so, because that's where we have police officers on the front line answering those urgent calls. However, I'd like some reassurance that neighbourhood policing is going to get an uplift as well, because at the moment we are quite down, and we appreciate this as a local councillor yourself, but we really do need our PCSOs and PCs on the beat.
If it's helpful to know that we were out the other day on a PCSO fraud neighbourhood policing initiative that was incredibly impressive. It's important to remember as well that we've given 5 million to local authorities, so each region has 1 million, that's correct, isn't it, for neighbourhood policing and those interventions. And that my bus service improvement plan also has additional PCSOs that are going to be on the bus network and transport, as we have transport police on railways. I'm hoping we're going to be having additional support around bus stations and so on, along with our safety bus tool that's going to help us with our thinking. But of course, neighbourhood policing is really important, and I hope that you'll be, I'm really reassured that reduce the number of antisocial behaviour incidents has gone down. So they do an amazing job in very difficult circumstances, and it's something that we have a weather eye on.
And just additionally to that, the Mayor and I have been emailing the force really since December to say we need to see where the additional police officers are going.
Yeah.
And so, for example, I was meeting the leader of Wakefield and she'd asked that same question, and I got an email back from the Chief Constable telling me, I mean, I can't tell what the rest of West Yorkshire because I haven't had that conversation, that over the course of the 3 years when the new police officers are coming, Wakefield's going to get 60 additional frontline neighbourhood police officers, as well as the extra PCSOs that the Mayor's funded too. So that's Wakefield getting 60, so we can find out what all the numbers are, because I only asked that question for Wakefield because that's what the lead area asked me to.
That's very useful.
Yeah, but all areas are getting an uplift on the frontline neighbourhood policing team.
But obviously, operationally, things will ebb and flow between regions depending on risk.
Yeah, the abstraction takes place internally as well as externally, so obviously if something's happening in Bradford, and people will be moved to Bradford. If something's happening in Leeds, people will be moved to Leeds. But on a permanent basis, the numbers will be as the Chief Constable has outlined.
Just as people are recruited to the service, which is great, there will be people who leave the service for all sorts of reasons. Some of which will be happy reasons, which are, they've done a full career and they're getting a pension. Pretty good pensions, I understand. Very well done. I think it would be helpful because it's a hole in our bucket, isn't it? Recruitment. And if people are leaving, it would be really good to have an understanding of why people leave and to have an understanding of that, because in terms of raising the complement of staff, it's going to make it even more difficult if we're not addressing reasons why people leave the service. Is that something we can see some information on?
So just to say that I meet with ACC Kate Riley, who is the person who's responsible for people across the force, and we get regular updates about the numbers of police officers leaving, and that is part of the government's uplift performance framework that they have developed. West Yorkshire are green, because we're green in all the metrics. One of, as the Mayor said, only a handful of forces nationally. So we have less leavers than other forces nationally. We have less black, Asian, minority ethnic leavers than other forces nationally, which is very pleasing. And so that data is put together in a performance report for the command team, and then we get highlights in our, we've got a thing called a JEG, don't ask me, I think it's Joint Executive Group. I don't know why it's called that. It's historical, we'll change it. And so we get all the data, the budget stuff, and those numbers are all in there. The good news is that I reported last year that I think we had about over 100, maybe 130 odd police officers over profile. We're still over profile, so even though police officers are leaving for the same reasons that people leave any job, or because of retirement, we've still got more police officers who should have left based on projections that have been in place for years and years and years, who have not left. And that number's coming down, which is good, because obviously we're having to pay over and above for those people, but I think we're still at about 90.
But that also does mean that you've got experienced officers out on the street.
So just a quick supplementary, which is, so the figures we have here for the total complements in 19, 20, 21, which are rising, that's a net figure, is it? Because it's also people who are leaving as well as coming.
Wendy?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
That's the workforce total, so it would be
it's
net
a net
of, the incomers and leavers.
And it'd be nice just to, actually I'd be interested in the future meeting to be able to see information about why people do leave the service and to get an idea about that.
Sure. When they leave the service, they do an exit interview. They're offered an exit interview. Not everybody takes it up, and that information is then used by the ACC to look at, if there's something they need to do. So yeah, we can ask for that as a future paper.
Yeah, and also there's a national staff survey done about 15 months ago, which actually we haven't had the full update from yet.
No,
so
that'd be good to get that, yeah.
So we know that there are some highlights. So for example, women police officers talking about misogyny, that was one of the themes that came out of it. So we've asked for an update on that, and there's a national black police survey also just been sent out about 2 or 3 months ago. The good news is that West Yorkshire are one of the highest returners of the survey. So again, once we know what the detail of that is, we'll include it in the report to panel, because I'm very interested.
Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Engle. Thank you. I've got a few things that have sprung into my mind from what other people have been saying. I'm curious to know what the sort of success rate is for applicants to join the police force. Are the recruitment campaigns that have been ongoing attracting the right sort of applicants, or people like whoever it was who rang 999 to complain that the bouncers nicked their drugs? I saw that video on the website the other day. Are we, or are you attracting the people we'd like to be serving in the police force? And how successful are those people when they apply? I'm also curious, the point about people preferring to work for a good police service rather than a failing one. Are we getting people trying to escape the Met and join West Yorkshire and things like that? And if so, do we want them? Or are they tempted?
We want all good police officers, please, yes.
Yeah, and I'm also curious to know if programmes such as Bradford on Duty seem to be having a positive impact for recruiting police officers in our area, or the opposite. Is it too soon to tell if that's had any impact? Seeing what it is like on the streets of an area like Bradford. So that's a few questions, sorry.
Well, I'll just take the last one first. I really enjoyed watching it. I think it was warts and all, and there's some times where you just thought, oh no, why have they said that? But actually it shows the human condition, and I can't tell you how proud I was of those emergency service. It wasn't just the police officers, was it? It was all across Bradford. I think they do an amazing job. I would hope that that would be a good recruitment tool, actually, because it would show that you do make a difference. As to recruitment from other forces, that is happening.
And JMP.
And Greater Manchester, so we're not too far away from Manchester. And to be honest, we want good people, but the police force will always reflect the people that they serve. So there will always be people who you wouldn't want in your organisation. But I am hopeful that with your scrutiny, our scrutiny, and the focus of the chief and the direction of travel, that anybody that is not fit to be a police officer is out of this force because they're not wanted.
And some of the conversations I've been having with the provider, Trinity University, have been on how are we eliciting the values, the attitudes and behaviours of new recruits, because obviously it's a 2 or 3 year programme, depending on whether someone comes with a degree or they're on the apprentice route, which is 3 years. And that is embedded throughout the training that they're giving. But obviously, people will always find, water will always find a way out, and people who have got dark thoughts about, this or that will always find a way around the system. And the system has just got to be, learning the lessons and getting better and better and better, closing off those loopholes. And I think policing is really alive to the fact that, people will say what they need to say to get a job. But generally speaking, the vast majority of people we are recruiting are, honest, really want to make West Yorkshire the very best it can be, and which is the same for all employers really. And I'm satisfied that the vast majority of the police here in West Yorkshire are absolutely amazing, one the best for the people of West Yorkshire, but we've also always got to be vigilant about those who really maybe shouldn't be employed by West Yorkshire Police.
And what your initial question was about the success rate of applicants, and Wendy, if you could answer that.
We've had a big discussion with the police about the national search programme that looks at the applicant from the start. So they have to apply nationally first. And we've been looking at, and the police have been supporting those applicants in their first application. And then when it comes from that, this is then the data that comes down about those that have then come through to interview stage and that sort of thing is really broken down. And that's the data that you get from ACC Riley, isn't it? So it's scrutinised each step of the way to make sure that we're getting the applicants, and nationally we're kicking back against them to say we want more of this type of person, and so yeah, it's looked at every step of the way.
Yeah, and also unconscious bias, and that's also looked at. So if feedback from a cohort of applicants is that well, obviously, women couldn't have got through that process because of A, B or C, then that's looked at through that lens, and could there be things that could be adapted to make sure, when we look at the data, how many women didn't get through, for example, and if it's higher than previous years or higher than it should be, then they'll look at adapting that programme to make sure that that bias is removed. So it's all that stuff's happening all the time, and the College of Policing are key parts of the work that goes on. And I meet the College of Policing because I'm the Association of Police and Crime Commissioner lead for equality, diversity, human rights and race disparities. So I meet the College of Policing every quarter to talk about a range of things, including recruitment.
Thank you, very full answer.
Could I just a very quick
question, because I'm conscious of time, and
I'm
we've
aware.
spent quite a long time on this particular item.
Just in terms of that sort of looking at how we're sort of filtering out, there was some sort of controversy about officers having records or having sort of history of sort of domestic violence or whatever that wasn't then picked up in recruitment. Are you satisfied that that's not happening, that that's been sorted?
So the vetting issue that came up through the murder of Sarah O'Brien has been picked up by the IOPC. I've been interviewed, so they're doing a big thematic inspection into vetting, and I've been interviewed as part of that, and so have other people in West Yorkshire, so that they're looking at it. What we don't want to do is throw out the baby with the bathwater, because it's really important that minor offences committed by youths, young people, are not necessarily then later on used to prevent people becoming police officers. And I can tell you a few forces where they have really successfully increased the diversity of their forces by having a more approachable view of vetting. Now, there are clearly some offences that mean you can never be a police officer, but what I've been saying to the IOPC, and I know other PCCs and deputies have been saying, is that it's got to be proportionate, and so there is a huge report coming out with loads of recommendations. Here in West Yorkshire, they follow the National Police Chiefs Council, NPCC, recommendations that were developed some years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, which say that not only do you vet people on, as part of recruiting them, but there should be regular rechecks of people's vetting. So that happens in West Yorkshire. So you might get vetted 1 year, and then up to 3 years later you'll get vetted again. And it might be 6 months later. It depends, because it happens on a. It's not. It's just random. So people get vetted on a regular basis because generally it's once every 10 years. So West Yorkshire have adopted that NPCC guidance, and so it's less likely to be an issue here. But obviously, people can commit offences after they've been recruited, and that's the period of time where we need the processes we've got in place to work.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to near the beginning of this particular section. Mr. Lake had a question
thanks,
about homicide.
It's page 17, item 3. First of all, thank you and well done for the new layout. It's really helpful to see against the plan. And a great set of metrics on that page 17. I mean, overall, they're all positive, except the one at the very top, which, although in actual numbers, is a relatively small amount, in a percentage situation, it's a 50% year-on-year increase in homicides. Unfortunately, the 3.1.1 doesn't really explain it in detail, and it might not be possible to do so with such a small number. But I suppose my question is this a trend that we're going to therefore end up with a higher rate per million residents as in other metropolitan comparable forces, or do we think it's a one-off, or there's just a bit of narrative missing there about a little bit of an explanation?
Thanks, Wendy.
With regard to the homicides, as you'll know, the violence reduction units came into place, and one of their key metrics is about homicide. And this was because in London they were seeing an increase in the number of young people who were falling victim to homicide. And what we've found, trends across policing, is that something like this starts in London and moves across the country, which is why the VRUs were put in place to try and stop the big numbers seen in London coming up. So yes, you're right, that we are seeing an increase, but that is reflected in the other metropolitan areas, West Midlands, that sort of thing. But we're seeing less per thousand population, per million residents, that's in 3.1.2, than the other comparable areas. So the VRU is working here, but as Tracy has said, it's about early intervention, and that takes a time to come in. So I wouldn't say that we're expecting to see large numbers, but this is a crucial time at the moment because we're seeing that wave come up the country.
Thank you.
It is worrying though, and we will keep an eye on that.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll move on now to section 4, and specifically section 4.4, reducing the number of first-time entrants to the criminal justice system. And Councillor Sharp had a question on this.
Yes, at point 4.4.2, it says there's an increase in adult offenders, but the numbers for young offenders is static. Can you let us know why that might be, and is it in relation to a particular type of crime?
Yeah,
Yeah, so it's responding to the numbers that are in the table at the top of this. So as we just mentioned about the VIU, their concentration is on young people and trying to stop young people going into the criminal justice system, because that's seen as once you get in the system it's hard then to get out. I'm seeing a lot of nods they agree with me here. So we put this into the plan as a kind of a proxy look at young people and to try and see the work that's being done. So I see this as a positive, that's why the numbers of young people is stable. It is, and you can see the trend actually is to go up with the adult offenders. So we're seeing that happen. So yeah, that's why it's in, and that's why I think it's stable. And hopefully the work of the VIU will continue to keep those numbers down, because that is where their focus is at the moment.
If I may add as well, the liaison and diversion section is fantastic. It's scooping up young people who could go either way, and then finding something that they're interested in to really give them a focus, and to then hopefully ensure they don't have a criminal record, and that they can, that they've made a mistake. We want to be forgiving to some degree, and to try and get them back on the right track. It's a great service, that.
Yeah. So, and I should say that here in Wakefield, the liaison and diversion service includes the yachts. It's award winning. It's won many awards for the prevention work that it's done. And in fact, that's why Wakefield holds the liaison and diversion contract for the whole of West Yorkshire, because of the pilot that was started here in Wakefield, led by Clint Hepworth, who included the yacht, the only contract in the country originally that included the yacht, and that's been rolled out across the whole of West Yorkshire. So together, you've got VIU working with people, obviously with knives, so at the more exploited end, you might say, and then you've got liaison and diversion, where first-time entrants, the people are in the cells ready to pounce, to give that support, and it's intensive for 12 weeks. It's amazing.
And we should have had a VIU paper here today, but the grant for the VIU has not been agreed by the Home Office, the final intervention, so we wanted to wait until they could give you a complete overview of what's going to be happening in the next year. And I'm sure you'll be, this will be answered by showing all the interventions that are taking place due to the VIU and what they're doing. So that will be in the next meeting in September.
We'll certainly look forward to that report. Thank you. That concludes our questions on the performance management report. Just to let you know, we do have a fair number of questions on the drugs and alcohol report, but fewer when it comes to the serious organised crimes report.
Okay, but if
you would like to give an overview of the drugs and alcohol report.
I will, subject to pressures of time, I'll be quicker than I was previously. Obviously it's all been read. It's linked to the police and crime plan and the work that's been done. And this area has come into prominence recently with the Dame Carol Black report, which set off the government strategy with 10-year funding attached. And we're hoping and trying to make the most of this money for the public in West Yorkshire, and coordinating regionally and locally. And there's other work taking place that's articulated in the main report, then in the appendix. Drug supply and possession, one of the areas of crime that rose during the pandemic while other crimes fell. And then there's also detail about the treatment services for drugs and alcohol, and then prevention and the work of the IOM team to stop reoffending. And I am pleased to see that numbers of drug tests has risen of those who are coming into, who have been arrested, which is helpful, because then we can pathway people into support to help them with their addictions. So obviously open for questions on that report.
Thank you. I think the first question is Councillor Tennant King. The question around the projects awarded funding.
Thank you. Before I ask my question, I'd just like to say I'm pleased to hear that Wakefield's getting 60 more police officers. That's fantastic. Thank you for that. But what I would like to ask is, could I ask that you make sure that the valuation forms are made available to the panel so we can see the value of the grant spent, please?
Oh, yeah, no problem. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Nice and quick.
Now, Councillor Courtney, you had a question around trauma-informed approaches.
Yeah, thank you. So this is more of a sort of a general sort of question now. I know Richard Dunbar, who was a previous member of this panel, brought up trauma-informed approaches in working with children and young people and the police, which was great, and we had sort of reassurances about that. And I suppose I'm just interested, I'm aware through, and I'm glad to see that, looking at a public health approach to policing and to crime, and that's really positive. So is there, and again, in sort of like some of the training sort of stuff, is the trauma-informed approach also being sort of looked at with regards to sort of people with drug and alcohol problems? Because obviously, we know that a lot of people who end up using drugs and alcohol are victims themselves or have been victims themselves in the past of trauma, and that's why they're in this position. I know that there's some very good practice in Calderdale. I know that the police, and I'd like to thank the Yorkshire police that are working with Calderdale. So there's some excellent work, partnership work going on. I've recently become lead member for public health, amongst other things, and so I'm sort of being, sort of learning your mind actually about that. So I just wanted to know that that's sort of on a strategic level that trauma-informed approach is being embedded.
Well, my understanding is that the training in trauma-informed approach is across the whole of West Yorkshire, and it was raised by us and by you, and West Yorkshire Police are implementing that. And you're absolutely right that addiction is so often the outcomes of trauma. And it is interesting, you'll see that nearly 52% of those that were tested positive. So there is a link between addiction and criminality, and we know that if we can get in early and support those people who potentially are there because of trauma, then it's like you say, it's a public health approach, isn't it?
I'm just about to take on the chair of the Public Health Programme board here in West Yorkshire, so that will mean that it's even more embedded than it is already, and all the response teams are being trained first. So it's a rolling programme, because as the Chief Constable explained last time, the police officers could be out on the streets or they could be in training every day. So it is a rolling programme, and they're identifying those areas where they're going to get the best bang for the buck, and so that's the response teams are going first. Just to say that actually the reason why we've increased the numbers of drug testing is actually because of the pressure. I don't know if because we were in a community outcome meeting, Damien and I, and this was a big issue for us, that we put a lot of money into drug testing, and that we didn't feel that we were getting the right level of outcome back for the investment that we were putting in. We applied some pressure and the numbers have gone up. We want those numbers to go up further, because actually 52% of everyone tested was positive, and so there's a huge amount of need out there in terms of drug and alcohol services that you're all commissioning, that we need people to get the right intervention at the right time, and everyone who's not tested is potentially somebody who is in need, but also potentially committing crimes in order to feed that addiction. The other great thing that I'm able to tell you from a harm prevention focus is that we've been working with the police also to introduce a voluntary naloxone carrying arrangement, and the command team have just agreed that they will offer that as obviously it's voluntary, so any officer who wants to carry narcon, you might call it, or naloxone will be allowed to do that, but there's going to be a training programme so that people are confident about applying it. It's now you don't have to put a needle in anybody now, you can actually do a nasal spray, which has made it a bit easier, and so that's a great development, because in Wakefield some great things are happening in Wakefield, but unfortunately Wakefield is also an outlier for drugs deaths, and that's why you've got the £1.6 million coming for your ADA project, because you are an outlier and people are dying. And finally, just to say, it's not in the paper because it came after the paper was sent out. The government have now asked for all the money that's coming nationally from the Harm to Hope report, Cowell Black report. They've asked for a senior responsible officer to be appointed across the localities So we're currently in negotiations with the CSPs, Public Health and the leaders about whether that should be me, and the CSPs have so far agreed that that should be me, that we're continuing our consultations with various partners because the SRO, the Senior Responsible Officer, is the person who will then report back to government on the additional monies that are coming into West Yorkshire, £38 million coming into West Yorkshire. So that would be great for us to be able to understand the impact of that money, but also the additionality that the Mayor's bringing, not just in terms of the 5 million, the £500,000 to the police for all the drug intervention stuff, but also all the additional money that the Mayor brings in through things like safer streets, etc., etc.
Thank you. Councillor Sharp.
Thanks, Chair. Just touched on this, but in relation to the 38 million, do you have any other plans in the pipeline for what this will be allocated to?
So, unfortunately, it's not our money. It doesn't come to us, it goes to the local authorities. But being the SRO gives us a brilliant opportunity to be able to bring all the partners together to make sure that we're getting best value for that money, and that there's no duplication, opportunities for cross county working, and I'm hoping that there's going to be some real investment in treatment, some great things going on in Calderdale, I have to say, that I know about personally, and I hope that what we'll do in these meetings is also see the best practice that's happening in other parts of the county and share that best practice and use the money for that, but it's going to local authorities.
But that's why it's important. That's why it's important. The testing is important, because then if you're doing work in the local authorities, that we then identify people who can be part of those projects.
Some of it's going to the police, but the majority is going to the local authorities.
Okay. Councillor Carter, you wanted to pick up on community safety partnership issues.
Yes, and you've partly answered that, Alison, because I was going to say it's important that the community safety partnerships have some influence over that £38 million. And it's great that the government have given them this £38 million. However, one of the things that I'm quite passionate about is mental health, as you are, I know. And of course, mental health and addictions are linked, and they're mostly addicted because they've got mental health issues, usually. But trying to get psychologists to treat them when they've got addictions is enormously difficult, as I'm sure you appreciate. And I know there's a lot of good work going around with charities for relief on addiction. However, there's got to be a national conversation at some point which keeps going on and on, because we need to bring the psychologists to the table to treat these people. Otherwise, we're not even getting a sticking plaster on it at the moment. We're just hardly touching it. We really do need to get these people treated. And I suppose I'm asking you, as an influential person in that area, to put that forward and try to bring it up as much as possible.
That'd be right for instance. I mean, dual diagnosis, as it's called, is an enormous problem and has been since, well, I've been in this business for nearly 40 years and it's been an issue. So the medical profession refuse to work with people with addictions because they say the addiction has caused the mental health difficulties. And similarly, the people in addiction services refuse to work with people until they've sorted the mental health difficulties. So people end up without a service. It's a national scandal, and I think that there should be some legislation around this nationally to prevent systems basically walking away from vulnerable people. It happened with personality disorder. The government said it's no longer an excuse not to work with people, you have to work with PD. And again, I think that dual diagnosis, the government has to step up and demand that all the systems work to support people with dual diagnosis. Because if they don't, then people are just left in this no man's land. And also, the issues that are driving their addiction or their mental health impact on the communities that they live in. So I'm really happy to write a letter and to support the Mayor to write a letter, and also you, the panel, and politically I think that we need to use all our best endeavours to get the legislation changed.
Mayor, delighted to hear that, Deputy. I'm happy to go down to Westminster with you to tackle ministers on that issue and use whatever small evidence I have. But I would like to help you in every way that I can to get something sorted. Actually, it is so important. We're just not even touching it at the moment. And we know that it does work because even from my small amount of casework, I know that if I can get those people treated for their addictions and for the mental health at the same time, it works.
Yeah. So one of the opportunities of me being the SRO of the 38 million is that brings all the partners together. So I think that would be something to put on the agenda, get all the right signatories together, and then we can definitely look at how we take that to government, and I will definitely call upon you.
Yeah. And we could be the pilot. We could say we'll be a pilot for this work. Just let us do it.
That would be really important, really good thing to do. Councillor Ali, does that answer your question? Yes, it does. Thank you. So we'll go on to Councillor Cooper. You had two separate questions. If you take them one at a time.
I did. One of which was about liaison with agencies. Often the best people to actually help people get off drugs or not go on drugs are not the police. It's some of the organisations that operate in the community. A lot of these are third sector organisations, voluntary organisations, and there's quite a patchwork of them. I'm just wondering, with an overview, West Yorkshire Police look at that and how it recognises gaps and what it can do to liaise with councils to actually suggest where support and help might be needed to help those third sector organisations expand or indeed start up.
Really interesting question. The difference across the 5 districts is vast, to be fair, with what we've got actually to refer into. So I think a couple of points is what we've done with regards to the officers' handhelds is created a list on there with regards to referral agencies within their local area, so they know when they come across somebody on the street, if it isn't within the arrested environment, of who they can refer them to. And then what we work with at a local level, within the structure that we've got with the Chief Inspector Partnerships, we'll look at what's available and then where the gaps are and try work with partners, and certainly the Community Safety Partnership, to try and fill some of those gaps. But it is a bit of a patchwork across the districts, if I'm perfectly honest.
So just the supplementary would be, it would be really helpful for us, I think, to actually see the patchwork, because that overview is often lacking. And so, and that will be something that we could feed into our constituent councils to see what we can do to help develop and
but with respect to Andrew, my response would be that actually it's a local authority and their local health bodies, not CCGs anymore because they don't exist, do they, but whoever the commissioning bits are, they commission the drug support services in their areas, or don't. So Leeds, for example, forward Leeds. And then when the drug testing takes place, the police use that as one of the referral mechanisms into forward Leeds, in Leeds, for example. Or in Bradford, it would be the Bridge project. There's also another, there's 2, isn't there, in Bradford? There's another one in Bradford, there's Bridge, and another, I can't remember what they're called. And so the local authority and their partner health commissioner, they're the ones who commission the services. So you can actually find out from your local authority what you're commissioning. And then you can get details on the performance of that contract. And so I'm just preventing the police going into a bit of a rabbit hole trying to find out all this information when actually it's at your fingertips.
That's fine, but what I'm hearing from the officer is that there is a patchwork and that it is different in different areas.
Yeah, in Leeds is one contract. In the local authorities.
Okay, but in West Yorkshire it sounds like there's a patchwork.
Yeah.
So listening to the officer, their experience is that there is an issue. So it would be useful to see that information.
I think what I was talking about, though, Council, is when we come into contact with people on the street, because when people come through custody, there is a very strict process, as Dennis Mayor already said, when we've increased the performance from September last year when we were challenged, or I was personally challenged with regards to that performance, and we've improved upon that. What we've got to understand is we still come into contact with people on the streets and we don't necessarily need to arrest because they haven't committed an offence. And what we then do, then look at what we've got on our systems of how we can then approach third sectors.
That's what I'm on about. Yeah. That's exactly what I'm on about, the patchwork. That's right.
But we do have a list with regards to all those that we'll be able to provide because we regularly update that system.
Okay.
But the police don't necessarily do all the referrals because that would take hours and hours and hours.
But they're in a valuable position because they have an overview of what's on offer. And that overview is something that we can all use in partnership to try and raise the general provision out there.
And that's why this is so great to be here, because you're in a position as councillors to see where those gaps are and put and you know, identify how you can resolve that problem.
So this is about joint working.
Yeah.
So could we have that?
I'm trying to agree with the words being said. If you inquire what's available in Kirklees and what is done there locally, and if you find that you're not getting the information you require, then bring that back and ask some more details. Because you know, I don't know what it is in Kirklees. I certainly know very clearly what it is in Leeds.
I've got an idea what it is in Kirklees. I'm just wondering how far to pursue this.
But you can always see what you find and then put it in an email and see whether it accords with the records that are held regionally. Okay. You had to have
I had another question.
Let's
see how this one goes. Decriminalisation and legalisation of drugs is sort of a topic which elicits a number of different responses. The approach being that obviously legalisation, decriminalisation might break the link between crime and the drugs trade, the illegal drugs trade. I just wonder what the mayoral team's view is of that.
Yeah, I've no desire to decriminalise drugs. That's my position. I know that other mayors have different positions. You'll have seen Sadiq went to America and suddenly decided he took a different position. But that's my position.
So the government's position. Okay. Fair enough.
Okay. Thank you. That is all the questions that we had demarcated for that particular report. So if you'd like to give a quick introduction to serious and organised crime report,
Lovely.
and then we'll delve into a bit more detail.
Thank you. This is obviously the national view of the main threats, and West Yorkshire is part of the national capability, because of course serious and organised crime isn't just in our region, it is a national issue. The work of Programme Precision is West Yorkshire's response, which I think is really robust, and that methodology of clear, hold and build is explained, and also the use of firearms and those who traffic in drugs is obviously driving a lot of serious and organised crimes. It also looks at victims and those coerced into membership, and the victims of fraud and other monetary scams. And of course, we'll continue to oversee and support the response and the workload, and also the discussion around the 999 and statistics is also. Oh, no, sorry, that's moving on. That's also about partnership working. So there's open to questions on that, but it's all explained in the paper.
Okay, thank you. I had a question to start with about how performance is being measured about work to tackle organised criminal gangs activity. There is mapping, but what about organised criminal gangs in neighbourhoods which cause major harm to local communities, as we all know? And what sort of work is being done there?
Well, I don't know if you'd like to take that, because that's more operational.
Yeah, certainly. I can, if I give you a Leeds point of view, because obviously prior to taking up the current role as Commander of Leeds, and what we saw was the sort of street level organised crime groups with regards to drug dealing, certainly use of machetes as well. And what we were able to do there was work jointly with the local authority and work overtly and covertly to deal with those. And that's replicated across the 5 districts. And through that, we were able to take a number of individuals off the street and put them before the courts, but then actually come in behind that with the relevant partners about taking that land back, improving it, so people then didn't come back in to street deal again, when we've actually taken that positive action. And that's where the real partnership and when we talk about that clear, hold and build strategy really does come in to bring those streets back into ownership for the communities.
If I may just add that it's really interesting, but also hard to hear that once, for example, the drugs network is disrupted, then they will be vying for position for that bit of territory. So then that's when there is almost a burst of violence, because people are trying to get into that patch. And that hold element is so important, isn't it? That it's clearing, but then making sure that people aren't being murdered with machetes as they try and get get that patch of the drugs trade.
Yes. And I should just say that there's also work going on with the VIU, so the Violence Reduction Unit works hand in hand with the Service and Organised Crime Unit to ensure that there's work going on hand in hand, so all the additional resources that the VIU can bring, that they can pay for overtime, they can pay for specialist officers and training, but also they can fund third sector partners to do the work at the grassroots level to prevent those young people who are at risk of criminal exploitation or who might have just started to venture into criminal exploitation, but they can bring them back from the brink. And also, we've got examples, third sector examples like Catch, who I'm going to go visit this afternoon, so I've obviously praised to the skies many times before, but also PACE, so Parents Against Child Exploitation, which the Mayor funds through her various funding mechanisms to work with parents of children who are at risk of criminal exploitation or who have been criminally exploited. So there's lots of different elements at play here. And then of course we've got Project Precision, which is even more funding for West Yorkshire, which is looking at serious and organised crime, again at a macro level but also at that micro level. Constant conversations going on between the two to make sure that that neighbourhood level crime is being addressed and not being allowed to then become West Yorkshire or even national or international.
Absolutely. So, yes, I feel confident that you're on top of the subject.
Well, on top
measuring
is
the
a lot,
performance that is taking place.
Yes.
If I could just say the additional recruitment of detectives is helping as well, because the complexity of serious and organised crime, and so much of it is international, let alone regional or national, so it is a very complex territory. So we do need the smarts of the police in that.
Yes, and we were outstanding, forgot to say that. We've just had our P assessment, the serious and organised crime was outstanding.
Thank you, Councillor Courtney. You had a question.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I have so many questions, but anyway, there we go. So sort of it's great. It's great to hear all the work that's being done. And my question is around limiting. How are you ensuring that there's a limit to the amount of what I would say, I don't know if this is good terminology, but collateral damage, for example, that maybe happens when you have, you've got the big picture and you're working, or the force is working at disrupting and taking out a sort of like a serious sort of organised crime element, say around drugs again, as sort of like a drug supply. And then there's some sort of like fairly low level, but it's not low level for the people who are victims of it, sort of crimes happening that are in relation to that, but they're not, but then they're not necessarily being pursued in the same way that they would be, because they're not wanting to disrupt the sort of like the bigger operation. So I mean, and again, this is sort of like there is some evidence that this does happen sometimes, but how can we limit that? Because obviously, while it's sort of like there's a greater good picture, isn't there, sort of disrupting that sort of
bigger fish to catch.
Yeah, but actually for the people on the ground who are maybe sort of not being sort of they're in harm, they're sort of maybe being beaten up by somebody. But that's not being pursued because they don't want to sort of go in and take out the smaller fish.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder how much of this is TV and how much is
this is
because it would not be. I mean, I'm sure the police will back me up here. If there was a crime going on at a local level, that would be reported, investigated, and all the energies of policing would be brought to bear to eradicate that problem. Even if there was a link to serious and organised crime. Serious and organised crime expects police to come and deal with stuff at that local level. They wouldn't think, nothing's happening there, but maybe we're being looked at. It's absolutely not the case that the police would not deal with a crime in a neighbourhood level because there was a link with serious and organised crime.
I'll probably write to you. I'll write.
But if you have evidence,
if you've got an example,
you must forward it. If you have someone has approached you, of course.
I mean.
No, you're completely right there, Deputy Mayor, and I've struggled to understand how they'd understand that when we're looking at the serious and organised crime group as well, because obviously everything's kept very, very close and tight-knit, and as we are dealing with these, even if we're doing it covertly, we will be capturing evidence of other crimes. So even when we take out the OCG, we will deal with everything we've got evidence-wise for that organised crime group to link out and take everybody. Because if we can charge anybody, we'll report a crime, we'll record it because we're outstanding in CDI, and then we will deal with them as well.
So it might be an assumption that something's not being dealt with because of that. So
Please
but I
email
will,
me.
I will.
I'd encourage everybody to report all crimes because if they report them to us, we know about them and can we deal with them.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's really helpful. And yeah, sorry, that's ended up being a bit more operational.
Yes, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lake, you had a couple of questions here.
I did, yeah.
Take
Thank you,
this
Chair.
time.
Item 8.7.8, it might be that you're not able to share any more information on that. The reference to the Western Balkans threat, it's come up on a couple of the papers as sort of a thread coming through here. I just wondered if it's something that's could be explained a bit more in terms of the comment about joined up delivery. Because clearly it's regional, as you said earlier, you know, it's not just local, it's regional, national, international. But there's a thread in in the earlier paper as well on the drug and alcohol. There's quite a big section there about it as well. And it was just to help understanding about, okay, so it's identified as a focus and priority, so what does that mean? What's happening as a result?
But there will be relationships with other forces in Albania and elsewhere as well, that the criminals will be maybe from Albania here and operating and bringing drugs between countries. But maybe if you would like to, maybe that feels a bit more operational.
Yeah, obviously I can't go into operational details, but to explain it a little bit clearer, I suppose, from what's in the report, what we've found is links. So if you look at cannabis farms within West Yorkshire, what we're finding is there's links to organised crime groups who come from or emerge from the Western Baltics, and they are linked across the region as well. So we share that information and intelligence, and then we will take action jointly against those groups.
Right, that's helpful. That clarifies it. Thank you. My second question was on the point around the A8.13 asset recovery. So the forces achieved 272 million in asset recovery during 2021, and then a comment about excluding the NatWest Spine. West Yorkshire Police.
This is the £264 million that we're gutted we're not going to get a penny of, and we've raised this nationally. So the police were heavily involved in identifying the criminality of organised crime groups, taking huge amounts of cash to a tiny little jewellers in Bradford, forget the name of the jewellers, and then they were taking literally millions of pounds every week to NatWest and would say, thank you very much, let's put it in your account. And so they were basically helping them to launder this money. There were no questions asked, it went on for years, and so NatWest, so the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, were brought in and have fined NatWest £264 million, which all goes to the Treasury, and then the Treasury gives it to, I know because I've asked this question, I've been desperate to get my hands on this money. It's all going to the armed forces and then armed force charities, which I'm very pleased for armed force charities, but policing needs it more than they do. So I'd quite like to get some of it back, and that's another thing we could ask government to change the rules on, because West Yorkshire Police identified the criminality, which then led to the investigation by the FCA, which led to the fine. There's our money.
Yeah, and the proceeds of crime money is put to really good use. And the Mayor's Community Safety Fund, you know, £6,000 to great organisations that are doing work in communities, really grassroots level. Just think what we could do with that. It's an outrage, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is. It doesn't seem right in any way.
Chair, if I may make a supplementary before you move on, just regarding the just as in my head, and it's now completely left my head, modern day slavery.
Yes.
And that all of us will have been really moved by Mo Farah's story the other day. And if I may, Chair, would it be okay if I reshare our animation to recognise modern day slavery in your community, so that the panel could share it again? Because it might be in people's minds, and they might be in a community and saying, oh, that doesn't look right. So if I may, just because it's in people's minds.
I think that would be excellent. I think that people don't realise the extent of it at all, or they have a particular view of where it might exist, and of course it's incredibly much more widespread.
Thank you.
Thank you. That would be most helpful. That's it on that report. So we'll move on to the response to any current issues from Mayor or Deputy Mayor to raise any issues with the panel.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Okie dokie. So government have asked us to respond to fire and rescue responsibilities coming into mayoralities. We're one of a number of regions, it's not just us. We've looked at it, we've had conversations with West Yorkshire Police, West Yorkshire Fire and Rescue Service, the Chief Fire Officer, and I'm not completely convinced at this stage that a formal merger is what we need. Our fire service is currently good, and in regions across the country there are so many that requires improvement. And we have an informal approach where it seems to us that each force, each service helps the other. So we also have that tri-services collaboration. So I'm minded to think, well, you know, is this the right time for this? It's extra responsibilities for us. I don't mind the responsibilities, but is it going to deliver any better outcomes is the question. And the merger may be mandated in the future. So we've responded to the questionnaire, and then we'll wait and see. But Alan, I don't know if you have any further thoughts on that.
So the response is due in on Tuesday the 26th, and there are some questions in there around the future of governance, which will be responding on, because the key proposal is to change the governance of the fire service to move it to what they describe as a single elected individual, which in a mayoral combined authority area would be the mayor. And as the mayor said, having discussions with the chief fire officer and the chair of the fire authority about the position.
Lovely, thank you.
Okay, thank
and we can share the response with the members of the panel.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Thank you, thank you. Anything else?
Yes, there's a couple of things. I was just wondering if there are any questions on that, but that's fine. You'll know that I took the decision to serve notice on our responsibilities for MPAS when I first became the mayor.
Could you say what MPAS is?
National Police Air Service. It's all the helicopters across the country. So when you see a helicopter in the sky, it's ours. Yes. So you can say that's ours, we own that. But as you know, that responsibility was supposed to be a rotating chair, but nobody wants to take it. And we are in a position where we're trying now to negotiate a positive outcome to our exit of the lead arrangements. What we're being told is that no force has the capacity to deliver the lead force model. One force, for example, said that they had to withdraw from potentially taking it on due to the resignation of the Chief Constable, and the other is now in HMIC special measures. So we've given the MPAS board time to develop a plan for 2023, Plan B, that must be completed by June 2023 and then implemented by no later than June 2024. So hopefully that will include new models and how that's going to be led and funded. It is something that I raised with the previous policing minister, with Kit Malthouse, that we can't be expected to run this service ad infinitum and no one else take the strain when it is a national responsibility, and the Home Office just want us to sort it out amongst ourselves. They're not taking the responsibility or the leadership they should. It is extremely frustrating that helicopters should be part and paid for by the Home Office and not forces and dealing with that. I mean, we're running an airline, and it's a cause of frustration, but I decided that rather than end up where we could potentially be at risk, it's really important to be clear then about these timeframes. I don't know.
Absolutely. Are there any costs? Well, there will be cost and resource implications for West Yorkshire as a result of continuing to run the service.
So all the costs are met by NPAS, the National Police Air Service.
Right.
So basically, all the costs of the staffing we take out of the main contract, but obviously the cost of the energy, the meetings, the resourcing, that's borne by West Yorkshire Police in the main. And I have to say, the Mayor's office, I go to a lot of meetings. I chair the local board, I go to the national board. It's very tiring and it takes a long time. So overall, we think our Chief Constable, who is brilliant, by the way, would be even more brilliant just focused on West Yorkshire Police and not having to run the National Air Service on behalf of all the forces in England and Wales.
Stand up, Mr. Lane.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was around in the days when we bid to be the lead force.
I know, don't be mad.
So I've gone through the whole history gamut here.
But we bid in knowing that we would rotate, so anyway.
There's the people impact, isn't there? Because you've already said yourself, the amount of time it takes up for you, the amount of time it takes up for people like Julie, the amount of time it takes up for the force, particularly the Chief Finance Officer, is a huge drain on the resources at a difficult time. So, I think you made the right decision not to destabilise the situation, but the more urgency you can put and the more pressure you can bring to bear to get an early resolution for it, the better, obviously.
So be reassured we're pressing government and the board and everyone to find a solution to this. Okie dokie, and just finally, I read the HMIC-FRS super complaint report raised by the Centre for Women's Justice with interest and concern, and I raised this with our Chief Constable in my first month in office. Police officer perpetrated domestic abuse is an issue for all forces, and I want to reassure the panel that I'm holding the force to account for the way these allegations are dealt with and whether such cases can be dealt with internally or by neighbouring force. I've already discussed the report July the 5th with the Chief Constable, and the deadline for the consultation is the 30th of July. And following this, I'll continue to ask for updates on how recommendations have been adopted and actioned here in West Yorkshire. So, as I said earlier, we do reflect the communities we serve, but we need to make sure that our police officers, that they understand that there is no place for domestic violence from officers in our force, and that they will be dealt with sharpish.
Could you, in this context, let me know how many officers in West Yorkshire are in fact suspended or being investigated at the moment for sexual abuse or domestic abuse?
In fact, it was one of the first things I asked the Chief Constable, and we do keep requesting that information, and we do have that, don't we, Wendy?
Yes, we do.
Yeah. So are we allowed to say it? So we've had a recent meeting where those numbers were reported to us. So what I'm going to do is, because it was a confidential report, if it's okay with everybody, we'll just find out from West Yorkshire Police, because some of those cases are actually live cases. So if we can just get permission to share that, and then we'll send you on an email with the data. Is that all right? Yes. We're not hiding anything. Yes. Really happy to share it, but don't want to get into trouble or destabilising any current cases.
When you do that, can you also put in the figure of the total number of police officers so that we can then have the comparison? I know that we know that and that there is that information.
But what do you mean, the over 5,000 police officers?
It's over 5,000.
Yeah.
Okay. But you will find that not all other forces are as transparent, potentially. So what is always important is to do a comparison with forces who are equivalent. And we don't necessarily know that those other numbers. So please do bear that in mind when you're looking at the figures.
Of course, yes. Glad that you're keen on the transparency of this.
Yeah, we have to make sure our own house is in order.
And the public in particular.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. That's my updates.
That's that. So there have been some published key decisions. Item 9. I don't think any of us have any queries about them. No? And there are some agreed actions. There are some outstanding matters, but there don't seem to be any significant outstanding items of concern there. So moving on to the forward agenda plan. We have been informed there's to be a delay to the violence and women and girls strategy, which was due to be presented to the September meeting. What's the reason for the delay, and when would we be expected?
Because of the vetting of staff. It should have been in post 3 months ago, and the board just started. So we just haven't had the resources to be able to do it.
When do you think it would be available?
I think say November.
Yeah.
For November meeting? Okay, well that's good to know, because obviously it's a really important day.
We'll be in a draft to the November meeting. Oh, October meeting.
And the Violence Reduction Unit report is expected for September. Looking forward to that.
And that was delayed, waiting for the Home Office to agree the settlement, as Wendy said.
As you said, yes. That's fine. We've been furnished with information about the complaints received by the panel, and none of us had any inquiries about that. So we're on now to any other business. I don't believe that any panel members had any other business. Is there any other business that you wish to share with us?
Nothing from me?
No? No, thank you. Well, to remind everyone, the date and time for the next meeting then is the 9th of September, and it will be in this room. I'm glad to say, because I've certainly found it a great deal
It's
better.
really good choice.
Much easier, and I like being closer to everyone as well. Sort of a great distance in the previous meeting.
We were peering over everyone. It was very wrong.
Peering over. Struggling to hear, not easy. So 9 o'clock our pre-meeting, 10 o'clock. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And good to meet all the new members.